Hi there, my front-end friends. My good friend Gary Simon recently created this, and actually it was a refactor where he'd started with this, and his video took a look at taking that design and turning it into what we see here, and he did a few other designs too. I'd strongly recommend checking that video out, which I have linked down in the description. And yeah, I really liked this design when I saw it, and I thought there were some really interesting things going on with it. And I said, you know what, I'd like to tackle that. And he was kind enough to share the Figma file with me so I could dive in and try and recreate it on my own using HTML and CSS. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be tackling this, trying to make it come to life, writing all the code from scratch. And not only that, I want to walk my way through my thought process and putting everything together and all the different things there as well. Because there are some like interesting challenges and stuff going on in here, right? We have this isn't so bad coming down the left side, but like here we have this that's actually scrolling off the side of the page, which kind of presents a bit of an interesting challenge because it goes all the way and is like full bleed, whereas we have it sort of held in a container or something. And there's a few little things in here that I think even just setting this up, like it's almost like one of those timeline things that I get asked about a lot, so we can look at how we can create that. And everything else here, it shouldn't be too long to do, but I think there's a lot of fun things we can learn along the way with it. And so if we bring this in here, just to show you what we're going to be starting with, we have this completely blank file that's right here. Well, blank, it's an HTML file, but it's the blank boilerplate where we have no content in here yet. We're going to be doing all of that, and my CSS file is just completely empty. So we're going to be starting from scratch to build this out. And just in case you're new here, right before we do dive into this, I just want to say that my name is Kevin, and here at my channel, it's all about helping you fall in love with CSS. And if I can't get you to fall in love with it, I'm hoping to at least help you be a little bit less frustrated by it. And by building out something like this, people always tell me they don't know where to start with projects. So I want to make sure this is something where I'm really going from like, how do I get started with this? What's my thought process behind it to help you be able to do it a little bit more independently as well. And that obviously would help things become a lot less frustrating. So let's take a look. And often what I actually start doing when I'm doing these videos is writing all the HTML, then going on over to the CSS. But we're actually going to flip things over on their head a little bit because I'm going to be starting in the CSS and then going the other way around. And that's because when I usually work, I usually have at least a few things in place that help me get started and that are in the CSS. And I actually have a boilerplate that I use that actually has a lot of things that has full of utility classes and layouts that are common and all of that. But we're starting from zero here. But I really do think having this in place before you start doing the HTML, first, then you're not working on a really ugly page from the beginning. But it just sort of gets you into the mindset of analyzing the design a little bit more than when you're just doing the HTML on its own. So if we jump back to the Figma file really fast, and what I would start doing is just looking overall at what I want to get from here that's really important. And so for me, the typography is really important. I want to come in and find out what fonts, the font sizes, and the colors that are being used. Here, there's some extra letter spacing that's being placed on a few of these elements, so that's important. I want to get line heights to see if there's any weird line heights, though on this one we don't have to worry too much because there's not too much text. Outside of that, I'm also looking for colors and things like these are obviously different colors. I have the color up here, the circles here, the line here, the background color. All of these things are things that I want to try and get. Font weights as well. I didn't say that before with the typography. And then also things that are going to be a bit of a challenge. And there's two things in here. We have this sort of this like timeline thing that's running down the side. Got to think a bit about how that's actually going to be done. And then I have this part here, which is kind of interesting since it goes off the side of the screen like that. But as a base, I'm not stressing about all of those things. I just want to gather as much information as I can. And because CSS is awesome now, we have custom properties, I want to bring as much as I can as custom properties over. And if you are new to Figma and you're sort of playing around in here, like here, if I click on something, I can get the information so I can see the color, I can get the font family, the font weight, the font size, line heights on stuff, and all of the information from here. And you can copy it over just by clicking on it. So it's nice and easy, though I will be turning all of the pixel values I have here into rem units for the most part for my typography. And then we'll sort of go from there. Now, just getting all of this information from a Figma file is kind of boring. So I'm going to fast forward or just skip ahead to once I have a lot of that as custom properties. All right, so here we are. And here's all of the custom properties that I got for my colors. Now, it's always possible that along the way you forget something. And if that's the case, it's completely fine. You realize it later on, you add another one in there. So maybe I missed a color, who knows? But I got as many as I could notice off the top and brought them all in here. I'm using HSL. Just because I find it the easiest one to work with if ever I need to tweak stuff, though since I'm using it from a design, it could just be hex. I guess it doesn't really matter too much. Everything in this case is using only this font family right there. And these were the font weights that I found. And you'll notice I put font weight regular to 300, and then I have my semi-bold to 400. And the reason I brought that one in is it's not really a semi-bold, I guess, but this is the only thing that was using 400. Now, maybe that's just because Gary was going quickly. So sometimes if you do notice that, it could be something you ask your designer about, but it is a smaller font. And because it's a font and it has a color and it's on a dark background color, it's very, very possible that was on purpose because the 300 was too light. So normally it'd be 300, but when needed, the 400 is coming into play. So I just called that my semi-bold. And then all the other bold text is just using a 700. And then I turned all the font sizes I found in there into using rem. And then for my colors, as well as my font sizes here, I'm using a numbering system, which goes from 100 to 900. Basically, my base is like my standard. This is my 400, and I just do that based on 400 for font weights, even though I don't use my font weights that way all the time. But this is sort of the default font weight. So to me, this is like my default font size. Anything smaller goes 300, 200, 100. Anything bigger, 5, 6, 7. Same with my colors. This is sort of like my neutral primary color. And then as it goes darker, we go higher numbers. And as we go lighter, then it goes to lower numbers. And the nice thing with this is it becomes very easy to add new numbers to it. So if you have a 100 or a 500, I can add those in, or if I need something in between those, I can just make it 250. So, when Gary comes back to me and tells me that we're adding 7 new colors to here, I'm not trying to find like a 1.5 or something, or trying to come up with new weird names for my colors. I just fit it into the system that we have. Now, I did say we're only focused on the CSS, but I do need to get this font. So we'll jump on over really fast to Google Fonts, where I've already found it. And in this case, we just have to grab the ones we need. So I need the light, the regular, and the bold. So once I've gotten all the ones I need, we can just come over to the side here and copy what we have that's right there. And then we want to bring that over into my links here in my head, and I can paste it in. And there is one problem with using Google Fonts is there are some privacy issues around it. If you're in Europe, there's I think it's especially Germany where you're just not allowed to use Google Fonts because of GDPR and the privacy concerns over just, it's using Google servers and stuff. So there is this really cool website, which I will link to in the description, fonts.coollabs.io, where it's a privacy-friendly drop-in replacement for Google Fonts. And so yeah, you can use that, and all you have to do is switch out the fonts.googleapis.com with this right here. So I'm going to copy that and move that out of the way, and then just this bit right here, I replace it with that, and we still have access to the font. And if it's a personal project that you're just doing, like I'm doing now, it doesn't really matter. But if you do need access to Google Fonts without wanting to self-host them, though there are benefits to self-hosting, and I've talked about that before, so there should be a card popping up and a description down below on how you can self-host Google Fonts as well. But with this set up there, we should be good to go. We can jump back over to here. We can go back to Google Fonts for a second just to get the font family rule that they're giving us, which actually I already had that set up here, so we didn't need to go back there. But now what we can do is we can actually come in and start setting up some base things here that we know that we need right from the beginning. So on the body, and actually, you know what? We're going to do one thing before we get to the body, which is actually going to be on the HTML. Because this is a dark theme where we have light text on dark background, I'm going to come here right away and say color scheme is dark. And this is actually going to set all the user agent styles to be dark. So if we go and take a look here, this is my site. Let's come here and just say hello. So you can see that it's my site there and it's working. And what's happening is this is basically saying that the user agent styles are dark. And then we have light, and then we have dark. And you can actually specify light or dark here, or you can actually say light and dark. And then it will go based on the user's preferences. So this can be a really fast way to create a dark scheme or light, switches based on the user's system preferences, which is really cool. But I'm just going to say dark because I have a dark theme going on. And just by doing that, it sets the stage properly, even though I'm going to be changing all the colors anyway. It's like if I forgot something along the way and we have that dark blue text, I know at least my default text color is white now. And if ever I add a form element, those form elements are going to be set up for dark mode already. And that just makes my life a lot easier, sometimes a little bit less work that you have to do. So I'm pushing the user agent styles into a dark mode like that. And then we can come here, and on the body, we want to set a few things. So let's just do that fast. We can do my font family. And this is why I like having custom properties, even if I only have one font family, because I don't have to worry about what it is. I just say my font family base. And then I have my font size, I know that this is going to be my font size 400. For line height, I'm just going to come in with a 1.5 for now, and we can sort of adjust it as we see based on the design, because I didn't get a line height from the project itself. The color itself was white. It already is defaulting to white, but since we have that in the design itself, I am also going to come here and say that my color is my var color, and it's my neutral 100, and it should look the same, but we're being a bit more explicit here. One thing that's important is the font weight as well. So let's come here and say the font weight is going to be my var. And in this case, it's FW for font weight, which is why I like doing this. And we want my regular, which is actually the 300, so it should get a little bit lighter. Now, a couple of other things, even though we don't, well, we have those SVGs that are going to come in, those icons that are going to run down the side. But before we get to that, the other thing that I do want to worry about here is just a couple of like basic reset things. So let's come right here, and very often we're going to see the star, the before, and the after, setting a box sizing. Border box. And you know what? This is so much less important than it used to be, just because of the way web development is now, where we're using Flexbox and Grid for so much stuff, and we're not setting explicit widths with padding and borders and stuff, but it still does make our life easier when we do it. Whether you actually need it as part of a reset now, I'm starting to wonder, but I'm going to put it in there anyway, just because I'm so used to working with it, and I feel like if I ran into an issue because of box sizing, I wouldn't think of it right away. So I'm still including it for now. The other thing that I like having in here is doing an image and having a max width of 100%, and also a display of block, because it just makes them a little bit easier to work with. And we are going to have SVGs. Sometimes having SVG in here can cause problems, so you can include it and then see, even though I don't think we're going to use our image SVGs as SVGs, we're just going to use them the simple way. You can also have like picture and video and anything else in here that you need. But actually for our, like, because we're sticking with really simple, I don't mind just leaving it like this. But if you add those extra selectors in there, it won't cause any harm if they're not in your project. And then if ever they were added, it could be a little bit of a safety net if you did want to have that, but we'll just stick with this to keep it more simple. Now, if this was a bigger project for me, I would actually be going and making a lot of utility classes right now. I love using utility classes for things like font weights, for colors, for backgrounds, and all sorts of stuff like that. But on something like this, where there's not that much that's really like going on, and it's not really the type of project that will grow into like this massive thing. If it became something a lot bigger, I'd probably be doing a complete refactor anyway. So I think with what we have now, we've actually set the stage for most of what we need, and we can actually jump into writing a little bit of HTML now. And just having all of that in place, even though like we didn't write a lot of CSS so far, I like having this here just because it got me into that like analytical mode of like breaking down the design and trying to figure out what the different pieces were here and sort of scoping a little bit out. And now I'm going to go over to my HTML and start thinking about it a bit more. So we can get rid of that hello, and we can come in here and start writing some stuff. And the first thing I like trying to figure out is what my layout's going to be. And we clearly have this section that's coming down the side right here. And then we have this other piece that's over here. And so in a way, because this is on the left, it sort of would make sense to come first. But I also would think like if this did get responsive, and we're going to make it responsive, but if it shrunk down and it had to stack, this would probably make more sense to put on the bottom. And just logically speaking, this is even the way the hierarchy is, like this is where I look first, is at this. And then I come and look at this second. So we have to be very careful with doing what I'm going to do here, because you don't want to change the order of things too much, but always put in your HTML the thing that makes sense, or however you're making your DOM. But put in the order here should make sense. And then if you are reordering, and nothing here is going to be focusable. So like if there's a tabbing going on, like nothing's going to jump out of order or anything like that, then we're fine. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to do a main plus an aside. So my main content will be there. This will be in my aside, but my aside will just happen to go on the left. And then what we're going to do, let's jump, and actually we'll do the aside first, just because it's right here and it's a little bit easier. And then we'll we have a bit more thinking to do when it comes to this part down here. And for my aside, the way I actually see this is I'm looking at them going, well, this is like, here we have skills and experience. And then the resume is coming here. Well, this is sort of the skills, right? They're HTML, CSS, SCSS, JavaScript, React. So if that's your skills, it would sort of make sense for this to actually have a title that we can't see, and I'll explain that in a second. But I'm going to put an H2 here, and I'm going to give this a class of visually hidden. And I'm just going to put my skills, because this section to me is that. And we could also potentially do that maybe with an area attribute, but I like actually, and sometimes it's fine to do that, but I find this is just a little bit more explicit. Like we have a list of skills that are coming here. And the main reason I'm doing that is visually when I look at it, it's really obvious what that is. We have here's the skills running down the side. But for, say, a screen reader is coming on something like this, then it doesn't have that visual clue. So by having this coming in here, we're getting a heading level that's going to be followed by a little bit of information after it. So it gives that some context instead of just getting this random list that they don't really know what it's actually talking about. And then this really is a list of skills. So I'm going to do an unordered list. And like we could call this like a skills list. I'm going to call it an icon list because it's made up of icons. We're going to have to basically customize the entire thing, but just from a semantic point of view, it's here's my skills, and then we give the list of them. So in there we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So we can put in 5 list items just like that. And I'm just using Emmet there. So li *5, hit tab, and you get 5 list items. And now what we want to do is we want to bring in those images, but we have to think about it a bit because I have brought those in. I have them in my project here. And I just exported them from Figma as SVGs. And so what do we want to do here with these SVGs? Well, we have to think about it a little bit. And like really, we just need these as images. We don't need any of the special SVG powers or anything like that. So I can bring them in as a regular image. And the first one here is my HTML. So I can just do html.svg. And if we go and take a look back in Chrome here, we can see that's showing up. And so then, you know what, I'm actually going to delete all of those and duplicate this for each one of them just because it's going to be a little bit faster, where we can do CSS, SCSS, JS, and I think the last one then would be React. And all of the icons come in. And now we could come through and give these all alt text. And then we have the skills here. So then on each one of these, I'm just going to come in and say this is HTML. This one is CSS. This one is SCSS. Then we have my JS here and we have React here because we just want to make sure that we're actually describing what each one of these images is. An alternative is you could actually consider these to be decorative elements, and right, they're just these visual things that are showing up, and we could use this visually hidden, which we'll circle back around to after, because obviously my skills is showing up here, and we shouldn't actually see it, but we'll come back to that. But we could come in here with a paragraph that is class equals visually hidden as well, hidden, and I could write HTML here. Now, if I did that, I would leave the alt here blank because this would actually be what would be providing the information, and the alt is required, but by leaving it blank, you're saying that it's just a decorative element, so screen readers shouldn't really pay attention to it. So just a couple of different ways that we could approach that and make sure that this area is still accessible. Now, to know the best route to go for something like this, if this is a concern for you, would be to talk to someone who actively uses a screen reader and ask them what the best way to do that would be. You know, they would get a different experience depending on if you did it this way or with the alt text here, because this would announce that it's an image. So it would be like list item, then it would announce image, and then it would say what the alt text is. And you know what? I don't think that would be the preferred way to go. And this is me saying I don't think. So it's still one of those things that I think would be worth like talking to someone with and finding out what the best way to do it is. But this would be how I would first approach it, where I would leave these blank and just put in this visually hidden text for each one of them, because I do think it would probably be a little bit more of a straightforward experience. So I'm going to do that for this one, but I do want to present sort of both options and why I'm going with this one right here. Let's just put React there and take off that alt. And it's all set up. Now, since we have all this visually hidden stuff here, we might as well circle around back to the CSS and set it up there. So jumping back over to our CSS, let's come down here, and I'm just going to paste this in because I have it in the clipboard, and I'm going to link to an article down below that explains it a little bit. But basically, you can see it makes all of that stuff that we'd had there disappear. Just with how this is set up, and it's doing everything it can to make sure that that content is out of flow, so it's not taking up any space and everything can go around it, and is just completely off screen. But if a screen reader were to come by it, it would still be able to access that information. So we can just include that right there. Again, this code, you can pause, I guess, if you want to copy it, but there'll be a link in an article down below about this visually hidden class as well. And with that done, we can jump on back to our design here, so we can start looking at this area, which is the sort of the more interesting area that we have to work on. So when we come there, as I said, that's going to be in my main. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a class of eyebrow. And I don't even know why these are called eyebrows, but when you have like a little bit of text that's on top of a heading, it's just what we call it. Then underneath the eyebrow, we'll do our H1, which I'm going to give page title. We don't really need it since we'd only have one H1 anyway, but I like having classes for those types of things. And then we can just have a regular old paragraph right there with nothing else on it. This is the one I chose for my base font size. If you went with one of the smaller ones, you might need something on there just to help make it easier to make the font size a little bit bigger. And now this bit down here. So we have the paragraph that's going to come in. I'll bring the content in a second, but I like just breaking down sort of the structure that I'm going to have. So we'll set that up, and let's just come in here with a job experience div. Nothing too fancy. Experience, I think I spelled that right. And in here we're gonna have it's our job experience, and I could definitely actually see this being a UL instead of a div. So it depends a little bit how you want to think about it, because it's sort of a list of my current jobs. The experience, these are the current jobs I've had. So it does depend on how you're sort of visualizing it and seeing it. I think just having this as regular content that goes in order is fine, but I could definitely see an argument being made to make it a list. But I also know from talking with people who do accessibility stuff that and that do use screen readers that we apparently do too much as lists sometimes. So I'm going to stick with a regular div here. And then so each one of these will be a div with a job. Let's just call it job, like that. So it's an individual job that's inside of there. And inside of that, we have a year. So that's nice and easy. I can just do a paragraph and call that year. Then underneath that, well, here it's kind of interesting because we definitely need this to be 2 columns. So because I know that it's going to be, they're going to be next to each other, we're first going to come in with another div. And I guess that div can have a class on it as well. So we can call it like job info because it has information. It's where, it's the name of the company plus the role. So here we have to think about this a little. We have the H1, which is going to be my resume. And then to me, it sort of makes sense that like sales engineer here, and if we look at the original one, we're going to use the text from the original one here. We had sales engineer, sales team lead, and then the IT recruiter. So like as we come down that, it's my resume, and these are sort of the titles for each part of the resume. You can see that Gary had added a little description because it looks better that way. So thinking of it that way, to me, those are headings. So I can come in here and I'm going to give each one of those an H2. We can just call that the role. And so, that's sales engineer or whatever. I said I'd bring in the text after, but we can put that one really fast. And then here would be, it could even just be a span or a paragraph with a class equals company. So it's the role and the company they were working at. One thing you might notice here, I'm not using like a naming convention like BEM or anything else. I'm just calling these what I need to. On something small like this, I think that's fine. If you're doing something that is going to grow in the future or potentially will grow in the future, spending more time thinking about your naming conventions can go a long way. But on something like this that I don't think would ever go beyond what we're creating, it works and it's fine. So, our role, our company, we have job experience, then job info, whatever. Let's not overthink it too much. So yeah, we have the job info. So that's those two. And then we just need this paragraph that is down below. So let's come in just with a paragraph. Now here we have to think, because this one is bigger and this one is smaller. And I said this is sort of my base font size and this one is a smaller one. But now I'm actually thinking I did it the other way around. So this one I might have to give a class to. This one looks big. One second, let's just open this up really fast. And the font size on this one is 22 and this one's probably 18 then. So I got that wrong. That's okay. So let's give this one a class then, and then I don't have to give the other one a class. And I'll just call this intro. And again, because it's a small project, naming conventions are a little easier. So that gives us our individual job right there. And then basically this job experience is what's going to scroll left to right. So I think we just take that and then we can paste it in and paste it in again. And we have our 3 jobs that are going to be there. And of course we can have as many as you would actually need to have. And the one thing is this one is the current role there. To me, this is always going to be on whatever the first thing here is. So we're going to look at a fun way we can do that with CSS and just make sure that it's always there without having to worry about putting it into the HTML. Whether or not, you could always add something or add a class here as well, but I'm just going to assume that the one at the front is always your current role, which, maybe you don't currently have a job, so it's not a safe assumption, but we're going to do it anyway. So with that, I'm going to take all the content that's here and just make sure I have something in all of the stuff here, and then I'll be right back. All right, there we go. Everything is in place. Put all the content in, I believe. and we're ready to rock and roll. And this is currently what we have, and it does not look anything like what we actually want to have. So let's jump back on over to our styles. And I realized I forgot something just as I was looking at this, because we have a black background. So on my body here, I did forget to put the background color, which we definitely have. So that was my color primary 800, I'm guessing. And there we go, we get my dark background coming in. Now, normally I have this off screen, and I'm gonna maybe potentially run out of space, but I'm just gonna sort of squeeze this down, and we'll leave Figma down here at the bottom area, and we'll have the browser at the top, so we can look at both at the same time. So the first thing we need to do, and I'm gonna zoom out on the Figma one a little bit just so we can see everything at once. And what I wanna do first is to sort of get the layout coming together a little bit so we can have the aside and have all of that in place. So I think what we're going to do, when I think of that, we have our body and then we have the main. Now, sometimes putting main things on the body itself can be a little bit problematic. So I'm actually going to come all the way here from the top down to the bottom. It's very rare that you run into issues, but especially sometimes there's third-party things that can insert classes or do different things on the body. So we can just wrap this entire thing. So to do that, I'm going to do a Control-Shift-P to bring up my command palette, and then we can write emit, and then we can see it's already there, wrap with abbreviation, and we can just do .main grid and hit return. So we get that wrapping around everything, and that's a really nice thing if ever you forget something. So you just bring up your command palette and then just start writing wrap with abbreviation. I think as soon as you write wrap, it shows up, and then you can wrap your selection in whatever you want. So now we have our main grid that we can work with, and we can jump back on over and set that up. So to me, all of this here is just sort of generic content, basically. So we can come down here and let's set it up, our main grid. So obviously that does mean we need a display grid. All right, I mean, you could have a main grid that's using flex, but I'm going to be using grid for this one just because I think it's going to work pretty well. And then we're going to use some grid template columns. And for this, basically what I'm thinking is I have this sidebar that's going to be here, and then I have this main area here. And when I was thinking about how to set this up, I was thinking about having that skill bar actually go underneath this way at smaller screen sizes, but it's kind of awkward at the same time because it's going to be so far down, we're not going to see it. And then it's actually going to take up more room if those icons go next to one another, because they're just going to have to like squish so narrow that it actually makes sense to keep them stacked. So I figure we can just sort of change the spacing, smush things down. We don't actually need to have any media queries or anything for the layout on this, which makes life easier. And it's one of those things that if you think that's the right approach to take, try it and see if it works. And if you find you're running out of space, then you find an alternative. Or if you have a design that actually has what it should look like, it can help. But in this case, we only have a desktop layout, so we're focused on that, and we're just trying to make things work. So just try things out, see what happens, and if it doesn't work out, then you find another thing to do. So jumping back here, we can set up the columns, and I don't need a lot of space on this side. So let's just say for now, I'm going to come in with a set value, but we can play around with that a little bit after. And on the other side, I can just use an auto. Now, the only problem is you can see that they're the wrong way around. So that's easy enough, because then I can just say that my main should be on my grid column of 2, and that my aside should be a grid column of 1. And you'd think that would fix it, but what it actually does is push this down below because of the order of the content, and it leaves this whole area empty, which is kind of awkward. So the two choices that we have at this stage are you can tell them what rows they should also be on. So we can assign a grid row of 1 for both of them. And so what I tend to like doing in situations like this where there's a very limited amount of stuff, or if I just want to make sure there's no empty cells, is doing the grid auto flow and just saying dense here. And if we do that, you can see that this fills in, it just moves up and it doesn't leave an empty cell. And yeah, that works. And the reason it's doing that is because we moved this originally when we made our grid, that moved over because we said go to grid column 2, and then the aside was after that. So it goes, well, I'm going to continue being after it, and I'm using this to force it back up. And again, you want to be very careful when you're reordering things visually with CSS. It can muck up tab orders. It can be problematic for screen readers. So just make sure that like visually it sort of makes sense how everything is flowing here. But I think it does. We've lined sort of everything up where we need it to be. And the other thing, eventually we might need it centered within the space here. So on this main grid, we can give this a min height of 100 VH. And what I like doing these days is also doing this. Obviously, VS Code's giving me an error here because I'm declaring the same property twice. Depending on your linting, you may or may not get that. But the DVH here isn't, the browser support's pretty good for it, but it's not perfect. and it just accounts for the UI elements on phones that move in and out when you scroll. So it's sort of what we want to have most of the time, but if the browser doesn't support it, at least we have the fallback right there. And we can just add an align items of center. And right now its center is kind of broken, so I might actually comment that out. I was going to start with this, but just because our layout is so broken, we'll set the stage for this part over here, and we'll sort of come back to finish it up a little bit after. So let's come down, and that's, what did we call that? We can come and look. We called that my job experience. And maybe that should be job experiences, plural. No, that's kind of weird. We'll go with job experience. I was thinking experiences just because we had multiple things in there, but I think it's okay like this. And once again, I'm actually going to use display grid for this. And even though it's columns that are going next to one another, I do like using grid, and I'm going to use grid auto flow in this case and say column, which makes it behave more like Flexbox normally would, where you can see they're actually going next to one another instead of going down like grid normally would. This forces them to go next to one another. The one caveat with this is there's no like wrap option like you would have with Flexbox, so it's very easy to cause overflow, but we want overflow, so it's actually kind of perfect. So if we keep on going with this, what we want to do now is, as I said, we sort of fix that issue. And so I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, and we'll focus on this area right here now. And if we go back to here, that would be our aside that we set up. So it's a scroll all the way down. And we have this aside, and then we have this icon list that we created right there. So for that, if you're following along with this and you are relatively new, what I'd actually encourage you to do is to maybe hit pause and see how you would do it rather than watching me do it. Because if you are learning through tutorials and other things like this, if you're just following along all the time, you will get stuck, or you'll still be unsure of how to start new projects. And so sometimes pausing, seeing if you can figure out how to do something. And so we're just doing this one small little thing. It's not super small, I guess, but you know, take some ideas or watch me do it a little bit. And then if you feel like you can pull ahead, go ahead and do that. Or maybe you're not following along, but you could just open up a quick code pen or something and just try and make something similar really fast just to see if you're able to do it. And if you get stuck, that's fine, because then you can see how I do it. Or if you did finish, you can see how I did it and compare notes and see which approach you like better, because there's always more than one way to do something as well. And with that, let's get this styled up. So the first thing we have is they're already lining up this way, which is kind of good, but we need more space between them. And there's a lot of different ways we could do that. I'm just going to use a display, you guessed it, grid. Why? Because then I can use gap to create the spacing I want. And it just makes it really easy. If you set this up with margins instead on your LIs, it works. It's perfect. Don't worry about it. So look at that. That's set up. Next, I was actually thinking for these little circles that I was going to turn them off. So do a list style of none and then bring them back in. They're kind of where I need them to be. So I'm not sure if I will. It means they might not be the exact same size as the design. If I had to, I would make them again. And as I say that, I probably will actually turn them off and make them again. The reason for that is because I need to make this part as well as that. And to line up this perfectly with the dot will probably be a lot easier if I don't actually have a list style. So let's say list style on that is none. Now, if you really want this to be a list, it's important here that, again, going to assistive technologies like screen readers, there are some screen readers that will no longer read this as a list because I put the list style to none. And if you feel like it should still be a list and announced as a list, which I do because of how I've set this up, you want to come and set this to have a role is equal to list, which will bring that back in despite saying list style none. So that's just one of those little caveats that come in with things. If you don't do this on a navigation, it might be okay, but on things that really 100% like this should read like a list, I think it's important that we do that. And it's not all screen readers that don't. I think it's only one of them. It's an opinionated thing they did just because of the overabundance of things that people were using lists for. But in this case, I think it's worth keeping, so I'm going to put that role back on there. It seems redundant, but it is serving a purpose. Next up, we need to style it a little bit more to match our Figma design. So we need a few things here. It's kind of interesting because we need the line that's running down here. And again, having those dots and trying to line up the line with the original dots would have been pretty hard to do. So for that line, there's a few different ways you could do it. And you might be able to get it exactly where you need it with borders and padding. Very, very possible. And you know what? I just realized something. I put this directly on the UL, which would be kind of dangerous to do that for all of them, because we did give this the icon list class. So I am going to switch that over and put the class on there just to make sure. It's the only one I think we have in our page, but it's still, I'd rather be targeting this one specifically. And the reason I thought of that is because I'm the type of person, when I want to bring in a line or something like that, my mind always goes to using a pseudo element. Now you might be able to do it with a border. My original draft for this had it as a pseudo element, but as I'm looking at it now, let's just try. And this is a big part of web development, is going to be trying things and seeing if you can get it to work. So you can see the border is showing up there. Let's just do a margin left of like 10 pixels, just so it's off the side of the screen a little bit. And I'm going to switch this to orange because I think it's going to be less annoying to look at. Whoops. Now, the issue is obviously if we are using a border, it's going to be the size of the UL itself. Now, we're missing that space on the top and the bottom. And the idea here, often you do a height 100% and then you wonder why it doesn't work. So we can come in and inspect that just to see what's going on in the dev tools. And we go, well, I feel like it should be working. You know, we can take that margin top and bottom off while we're here. But then when I go here, I go, okay, why is my aside only that high? And then you go, like, notice how there's a difference in height here. And it's because when we set up that grid originally, I came here and I did an align items of center. And when I did align items of center, that's controlling the height of the aside here. So on the aside, I guess we have two choices. We can say that the align items center here is, we could only do that for the main, or we could go to the aside itself and we could say that this is actually going to be align self of stretch. And that means it's going to stretch back to being the whole height of our main grid. So it's the entire height of the main grid. And then we have this inside is going to match that height. Now you can't always use height 100% for things, but in this case, because the aside is a grid item, it's able to work. So just know that sometimes you'll put a height 100% on something, it doesn't work. For this to work, the parent needs to have a height, but because the aside is a grid item, it pretty much gets assigned a height, so it does work. Now we do have some empty space on the top and the bottom doesn't seem to have any, but I do believe if we came here and we say margin, that's margin left, so we can just say margin of 0 to get rid of all of our margins. And we're left with a little bit of space there. And if we inspect here to find out what's causing it, everything is going to the top. I forgot something when I did my initial reset. My body still has the margin of 8 on it. We always forget things, right? So come up here, we can say margin of 0. And now it actually touches the top and goes all the way down to the bottom. And it doesn't really matter what the screen height is. It should always be matching. So that is great. Except obviously the icons should be more grouped together in the middle. And so if you run into this situation, in this case, I did use a display of grid. So maybe you know how to do it with Flexbox, you don't know how to do it with grid. You could just Google, how do I center align things? You might find align items center and then it doesn't work. Center, that is one thing with grid and with Flexbox. Grid is a little bit different and we have the align content, which will actually work here. And now if I stretch this out, you'll see they're actually staying centered this way, which is exactly what we want. And then we have the border running down there, all without a pseudo element, which is fantastic. That's going to make our life a little bit easier than what my original plan was. Now, you might have also used Flexbox for this instead of grid, or you might have found a completely different way of doing it. That's completely fine. You don't even need them really. You could, as I said, we have our margins that are between those. Maybe you used a pseudo element like I did in my first draft of this. You could have 100 different ways of achieving something. As long as it gets you there in the end. Sometimes it's more work. Sometimes you're definitely over-engineering things to get there. But at the end of the day, if it works, it works. But I do like trying to keep things as simple as possible. Anyway, let's move on with this. And what I'm actually going to do is let's set up this margin left a little bit better now. And I'm going to go with 3rem for now. Just all I'm doing is creating the space here, maybe a 4rem, just to give me the space. You can see it's a lot bigger than what we had in the original design, or a lot smaller, I should say, than what the original design was. But we'll sort of circle back to that. I just want to have something there for now. And then we'll come back around to setting the color, getting the spacing to be good. I just want to make sure it's not glued to the edge of the page now. And we can go to trying to create these little icons. And for me, that's icon, list, and then we have the LIs that are in there. I never gave these classes or anything else, so I'm just going to select it this way. We could even do that. There's nothing wrong with selectors like this. They work perfectly fine. It scopes the styling we're doing here to that. So I'm going to go with it because it's nice and easy. The one thing it does do is it raises the specificity of it. But at the end of the day, for something like this, it shouldn't actually matter at all. So on that, we do need to get the dot and the other dot, right? Like the center circle and the bigger one. So let's focus on getting that center circle right there. And for that, on here, I'm actually going to do a position of relative. And the reason I'm doing that is because to actually make these little dots, I'm going to be using a pseudo element. And for that one, I'm going to actually use the pseudo element that I'd planned on using, whether it's before or after, it doesn't really matter. And I want you to actually, again, if you're following along with this a little bit, or even if you're not, hit pause right now and see if you can think of a way of doing it with one pseudo element and not two, because we only need one to actually do this. And so I'll start styling this up. You can continue thinking about it, but it is actually pretty easy to do. So here I'm going to say content, or simple, I should say. It's sometimes thinking of the solution is not the easiest. Sometimes it comes to mind right away, and other times it takes a little while to get there. But let's just say here we have a width, gotta spell things right, of, I don't know, 0.25 rem. You'll notice I use rem a lot. If you're using pixels for things, it's not too bad. Just don't use pixels for font sizes. That I would really encourage not to, but in general, if you can get more used to using rems and other more relative units, it's always going to be for the better. Instead of giving it a height, I'm going to give it an aspect ratio of 1, or you can do 1/1 or just 1. So that just means that the height and width are always going to be the same. So if I do need to adjust the size, I'm only adjusting one value. It makes life a little bit easier. The next thing we want to do is set a background color on it. So background will be we have that neutral 100 right there. And nothing's showing up yet because you either have to give it like a display property or position absolute it. Basically, if you want your pseudo element to show up along with the content here. If you're not used to pseudo elements or you don't know too much about them, I do have a very in-depth video. I'll link it down in the description below that talks a lot about how to actually, how they work and all the different things you can do with them. So there we go. That's looking pretty good. Now we need them to show up. So I'm going to be using position absolute, as I already said. So position absolute, I'm going to move this up because I like having that closer to the top. And actually you can see it has shown up and it's a little bit too small. So let's make it, it's probably in between that we need, but it is right there. And for now we could actually do this. Background is going to be purple, just so we can see it. That doesn't stand out on a blue background. We'll go with yellow. Just so we can actually see them a little bit better. Sometimes that does make life a little bit easier. And then changing it, just like I did with my orange line right there, we can make them a circle, and then we need to position them. So for that, we can say that the top will be, and I just realized, I think we're going to run into a bit of an issue here, but we'll see. We're going to do a top of 0. And now how do we line it up perfectly with the left here? Because if I do, let's see, left is 0, it doesn't move. So how can we line it up perfectly with that orange line right here? And there's a few different ways, but right now we have this margin left of 4 rem. And so we sort of need to figure out what this distance is. And well, you know what? I never created that distance. That was just always there. So if we come and inspect on here, and again, inspect a lot to understand what's happening when things aren't working properly. And there's the LI. And then look, we have that big green part coming up right there. The green is padding. I never assigned any padding. User agent styles, because we are on a UL. So lists always do have padding on them. I never mentioned padding. So we might as well come here and also say padding of 0. And now we set those up so they're lined up on each other. But the nice thing is we know exactly how big that space should be. So, or not how big it should be, but we can control how big it is, I should say. So over here, we could either do this in 2 ways. I could do it on the LI here, where we could say that we have a margin left, and I could say 3 rem, and it's going to move over. A nice other alternative is I could do it with padding left, and look at that. The line, these are staying within the padding. Because of how position absolute works, it's not going to stay within the margin box, but it will stay within the padding. If this padding were on this part instead, so we said padding left here, we wouldn't, it's still sticking within the LI. But if that padding is on the LI itself, it just makes it a little bit easier. Now it's not perfect because we need it over a little bit more than it is now, but at least it's getting us in the right direction. So then what we can do is we can actually come here, and on this left, we could actually have this set up so it's half of the width. So we could do a negative 0.25 rem. Should help it go so it's right in the middle of where we want it to be, because it's taking half of that. And actually it should be like half a pixel or 1 more pixel over, because this has 1 pixel of width on it as well. And to me, if you are going to do that, we might as well go the next step and actually make this a little bit more like self-contained and just make it work on its own. You might say this is over engineering things, and if you do think that, you can leave it without this. There's no problem. If it's a number you're never going to change, just set it up, get it working, we're happy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a locally scoped custom property here at 0.5 rem called size, and that's going to come here, var size. And I'm calling it size and not width because we have the aspect ratio, so it's setting the width and the height. So if I hit save now, everything stays exactly the same. Then what we can do is come here and do a calc and do a var size, and we can divide it by 2. Now it's going to go the wrong place, and the reason it's going to the wrong place is because this is a positive value rather than a negative value. So we could divide it by -2 and it goes back to where it was. And now we have that set up and it's working. And what I like about using this is now if ever I needed to change the size, it's really easy. If I need to make this bigger, I set that up and it's going to work. Or if I need to make it smaller, 0.25 now, we need to shrink it down, it's going to work. Whatever I need to do here, it is going to end up in the right spot. So it's going to change my left and my width and do the math on that all together. Just cutting in here because I realized something as I was editing this video that I overcomplicated things here. Speaking of overcomplicating things, where I went in with this, I said, as I was saying it out loud in the video, or I was watching myself say it, and I said I need to move it back half of its own size over, and that's why I did this. We could have left this as a 0, and then it goes back to where it was. And I've zoomed in here just so we can see it a little bit more clearly, but it's moved over. And then what we could just do is a transform and then a translate on the X of -50%, and hit save, and it goes right where we want it to be. And this is happening just because the way translate works is the amount you're translating it is always relative to the size of that thing you're translating. So -50% will be -50% of its own width. So with that, we could get rid of the custom property, just leave the width here, and it would be fine. But the rest of the code that you'll be seeing going forward will be with that old calc version. But as I said earlier, there's often more than one way to do something. Sometimes we overcomplicate things just because that's the first idea that comes to mind. And at the end of the day, if it works, it works. So I guess, but anyway, here we go. I think this is a cleaner solution, so I did want to share it with you. With that, we'll jump back to the original video now. The only other thing that you might want to do, because here we have like a variable and here we have a variable, just to know where your variables are. This is something up from Leoveru where we can put an underscore here. And this is saying it's like a private custom property for this. And then that means on these, we do need to also, this is just like a naming convention. I zoomed out instead of putting an underscore, I apologize. But we want to put those in both of those. Naming convention, nothing else. But it's just saying if you're coming and looking at code really fast, then you know these are locally scoped custom properties. They're private, they're only being used here. Whereas if you see something like this, it's a global property, you can find that up in the root. If you don't like that naming convention, don't use it. You want to use something else, go with something else. I've started using this and I really like it just because it makes it more clear where different things are being defined. Now with that done, we can set the colors on here. So here I'm going to set my var neutral 100. Oh, whoops, we didn't need to. We could have deleted that line. And then we can set that line that's going up and down as well. Let's fix that. And then we'll get that extra little circle that's showing up on there as well. So for this one, let's just try our primary 300, and that looks pretty good. Maybe it's the 200. I think it's definitely the 300, so we'll go with that one. And now when I was getting all of my colors, and maybe when I told you how would you make that second circle, I should have made it more, I should have mentioned. But my primary 400 that I have here actually has a low alpha value. And so I sort of cheated a little bit with that one. And it's actually the color that I want to use for that. And the reason why that's important, and maybe the naming of this one should actually be different because of that. And so what that means is we can come back down to here, and where we set up our border here, or I mean anywhere really, we can come on and put an outline. And 1 rem, solid, and use that primary 400 that we had. And when I do that, look at that, like magic, it's there and it's working. Obviously it's way too big. We can sort of find out the size that we need. I think that looks pretty good. So there we have that. I think it's actually looking pretty good. We can obviously do a little bit more fixing up. So like moving these into place and a few other things. Those are really small details. So it's just about fine tuning it a little bit. So rather than dragging things out as I do that, we'll just skip ahead until where I've got it in the right place. All right, so I think that's looking better in terms of the relationship between the dot and the icon itself. I think we're more or less there. The one thing I did want to make sure, I just changed my padding and played with the top and stuff like that to get them in place. The one thing I did want to look at in a bit more detail was dealing with this margin left, because I do want this to be responsive. So instead of having that, which again, this is like if I change this value as a reminder, it's controlling the space here. And I think this is an important piece that I do want to control. So what I'm actually going to do is set this within a clamp, so we can get rid of that rem. And that means that it's something that's going to be able to adjust according to the screen size that's available to it. And this does just get a little bit of, you have to play around with it a little bit to get it to work the way you need it to. So if we come in with like a 5 rem, maybe a 10 viewport, and then a 10 rem or something like that, you see it's not matching it perfectly, but that's fine to me, because as the screen size gets bigger, now we're running out of room, so we're gonna have to do another adjustment. But let's go this way instead. Maybe this could even get a little bit smaller. So maybe a 3 or a 4. So like as the screen gets smaller and smaller, this space here is going to shrink down, and then as it's getting bigger, it's going to grow and grow and grow. So, and then again, we're running into some issues that we're going to fix because it doesn't look perfect, but at least we're sort of getting this on track the way we need it to behave. And there's a lot of moving pieces here, so you play around with it a little bit. We also need to control the space that's going to be coming up on this side right here. So there's a few different things that, because they are interacting with one another, that we just have to play around with things a little bit and see if they're working. And we could even like control the gap here. I have it as a set 3 rem. I think it's going to be fine, but that's even something that we could play around with to see if we need to adjust that. And we sort of have two choices even here of whether we want the space here to be assigned with a gap, or if we just want to throw a margin there and have this control everything. Because if you remember when we set this up, we did do it with here where I sort of assigned it this 15 rem space. But like we could even go with an auto here now, right? We just need to have 2 columns. Auto means go to the size that's required, or like auto and then one FR here might be better, because the FR is going to take up the rest of the available space. So if I'm doing that, maybe I just want this to control everything here, including that space, instead of using a gap. And I'm going to go that route. So, but I think for me, just because visually, if I look at a design, I haven't been there in 6 months, I'm coming in to do the code and I see a space like this and I see there's a grid, I'm going to assume it's a gap. So we can add that gap here. And even here, we could use a clamp as well. So we could say clamp, and the gap could be something like 3 rem, 10 viewport width. We can do sort of similar to what we had before. Whoops, I forgot my semicolon. There we go. And it starts bringing that in, and you can see, oh, maybe I need this to be bigger. So we can make it bigger, and this looks like it needs to be bigger as well. And you can start lining it up a little bit with what your actual design was. And again, this should, as we get bigger, will continue to grow, though we probably, it won't grow on forever. And then as this, if we shrink this down this way, the gap gets a little bit smaller. This is doing this right now. We're going to fix that. But you can see those icons. Ooh, that could be problematic. We might need to actually set a minimum size on that to prevent that from happening. So maybe we should set this. I'd said 15. You might want to play with what that is, because right now this is definitely not getting small enough. So again, this is one of those worlds where you do have to play around to try and find what's going to work, and you want to make sure you're not running into this. But to make sure that doesn't happen, I think what we're going to do next is work on the rest of this. Because if we get this working with that scrolling that we need to have here, then that's going to sort of solve any problems that we might run into. And that's also another important thing is like, because things are so interrelated with one another, if you find yourself getting a scroll issue and you haven't finished everything that's on the page yet, or like all the components aren't done, make sure they're done first, because sometimes fixing those fixes the problems that you're running into. So don't like over engineer a solution based on one thing being finished. Try and get closer to the end, or make sure at least the pieces are sort of working before you start worrying about making sure everything comes together properly. So looking at this part here, if you remember, we had the eyebrow, the page title, and the intro. So that we can style up really, really quickly. And I'm actually going to do that right above this job experience that we'd set up. And I'm going to sort of go through this part really fast, just because we're basically just setting some typography rules, and then we'll go through on the rest of it in a bit more detail. All right, so now I think things are looking pretty good, and especially over at the top here, we can see things are matching up pretty good. Basically, I just did some typographic stuff here. If you really want to get all the code, you can get it in the repo. I've linked it in the description, but you can just see I set some margin 0 and set some stuff on it, and we're getting pretty close to what we wanted. And I did start styling up the job part here a little bit. You can see I got the background color and I actually realized my body's background was set to the wrong color. So I updated that as well. But I do want to take a little bit of a look at styling up inside of here because we're sort of running into this. Look how narrow these guys are because we're trying to fit everything in the page and it's really not working right now. So this is causing a bit of an issue, and I think it's an important one to take a look at. And so to dive into this and to take a little bit of a look at how we can match this a little bit better, before I start worrying about the layout in here, because it's so smushed, if I try getting this to be 2 columns and like the line breaks are all going to look weird, the spacing on stuff is going to look weird, it's just not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that before we worry about the micro layout, I want the bigger part of the layout to actually work better. And there's 2 ways I could do it. I could actually just like assign a width onto my job itself, or because we are using grid here with the grid auto flow, I can also say grid auto columns and I can assign a column there. Now normally this is my preferred way of working, but at the end we're going to do a little trick just to make sure that when we scroll that like the last thing isn't glued to the edge of the page. And so because I'm taking that route, I'm going to be going with doing it here and setting a width. Plus I think it's easy enough to follow in either way. So I'm going to do this with a width right here. And from the design, the width was roughly 27 rem. So I am going to stick with that. And just give myself that extra room to work. I think maybe it was maybe a little bit bigger. We'll go 28. And obviously everything's glued together right now. So here we are going to add that gap in. So around 1 rem, and we can see we're getting there. And if this is at 100% zoom, which I am at, if you do have both on the screen like this, you can actually see if things are lining up properly. So that actually probably 27.5 or 28.5 maybe. And it looks like it's sort of lining up the 2 of them. So I'm going to say that's a win. Or you can get more pixel perfect, but please don't worry about pixel perfection. Worry about I'm getting it to look good because pixel perfection's a lie anyway. So there we go. That's looking not too bad. And at least now when I'm coming onto this, I have the room to work to make that layout happen. So now I can start worrying about all the little pieces that are inside of there. And well, I didn't do this with my reset. I've been sort of handling margins individually. Here we do have a lot of things that are closer together and we do have a lot of space in between them. So I'm going to do this. Some people don't like this approach, but I'm just going to say anything that's inside of job has a margin of 0, just to nuke the margins for this one component. Up here, having the margin, the default margin on here actually sort of helped me a little bit. So I'm not a big fan of just necessarily saying margin 0 on the star selector in a reset. It works fine. I do use it on projects, but doing something like this where you just get rid of it in one location, sometimes that's good enough. So we're going to do it like that and just worry about this little micro component thing that we're building right here. That's not a micro component, but whatever. This one little bit that we're working on. And doing this will help us out. So I'm going to worry a little bit less about the font size of that almost matches, but what we will do is worry more about the layout, and we can sort of skip ahead on some of the typography because it's a little bit boring. But on this, we have the role is looking pretty good, or actually we had the job info. I should be doing job info because on that, I want to set a display of flex. And that's because, oh, look at that. I muck things up really good. Job info, H2, look at that. I closed this div in the wrong spot. And these are the types of things that we make, and we just fix them just like that. And now we have that, and this is right there, exactly how we wanted it to. The other ones are broken, but we'll come around and fix those up in a second. I won't worry about those right away. Let's just get this working, because then once we fix the layout on the other ones, it will all come together. So now what we want to do is we need to get this onto the other side. We're using flex, so we can use a justify content space between. And if you're newer to creating websites and all this, and I'm using grid and I'm using flexbox and like I'm using these alignment things, really, I know them because I've used them so much. And even then I try one, it doesn't work, I try another one. So you can just muck around with them, play with them. If you're really not sure, in the dev tools, there's really good tools now to play around with alignment. Like here I have the flex. I click this little thing and I can just play with like how the spacing is working and the alignment and everything and move things around and see this is doing nothing. Okay, let me try changing these ones here. And now, oh look, they're moving around, right? And like mucking around with that. Or there's websites that have cheat sheets, or if you like a PDF, or if you'd like to have something printed out that has this Flexbox stuff that's broken down for you a little bit. I actually do have a cheat sheet as well, which you can get down in the description if you're interested in that type of thing. But you know, it's just having that information in front of you will make your life a lot easier, because it takes a while to get used to them, and there's no harm in just feel like if you're looking at going, I don't know, that's fine. Try different ones out, or whatever. Find your cheat sheets or find the information online. It's a big part of it. So there, I know I want this one. And actually, if I look at this design, I can see that they're sort of lined up along the bottom and not along the top. So I probably do want to do an align items of end. You might see some of these that are using, if you look online at things, it'd be flex end. They'll work the same way, but because grid and everything is using these, they smarten them up a little bit basically. So if you see something that's using flex end, you can just take the flex part off now. It's well supported, so you should be fine. And that should line the bottom of that with this. Now there is an issue here that I didn't anticipate. The bottom of this one looks lower than the bottom of that, and I think it might have to do with the line heights. Could be interesting. Anyway, we'll keep going and see once I change the font size and stuff on that. It might not be an issue anymore. Again, start bigger picture and then worry about sort of the set everything up and see if everything is still, if there's little things that do need fixing or not. Now, after these, we do need some space there. So I could add a margin top to this or a margin bottom to the job info. And since I have this selector here, I'm going to do a margin bottom and just say 1 rem and see what that looks like. Probably pretty close. So I'm happy with that. And overall, the layout here is working, so I'll see you in a second just after I finish fixing up the typography. All right, so I think things are pretty well set up, and this is one of the first times I've come up with a solution here. I was going to come up with something a bit more complex and dive into the whole thing with you. And then I thought of something that I very, very rarely use. And this comes to what I was just talking about with using, learning all the different things you can do with Flexbox. And on this job info earlier, all I've done now is change colors and font sizes and stuff. And it actually made the separation here worse. And that's because I think this is uppercase and the font sizes are different. So like, see how they really look like they're off. But if I highlight both of them, the blue line is basic, like they are lining up properly. It's just the way the fonts are rendering. And this align items end. Then I'm like, what about a center? And then the center doesn't really work either. And then I remembered, off forgotten align items baseline. And they line up on their baseline, which is the bottom here, not where the G sticks out, but like the part where all the letters sit on, and then this here too, and they line up perfectly. I almost never use this, and I just, part of knowing these things, it makes it a lot easier, but these are the types of things you can just, you're looking at one of those cheat sheets and you see baseline, and maybe it just helps spark, you know, that thought for you. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I'm super happy that I actually found a use case for it, because it's very rare that I actually come across these. And now I've also gone and fixed these two, but we're running into one issue, which is, well, this one was looking really good. I actually brought in like different text, whereas Gary used the same one for all of them. And we're getting into like some line break issues and some other things. And you can see like things are looking a bit funky, especially with this really long title. So more work could potentially go into how these are being set up. The only thing I'm going to do is on this one here, which is my company. On the role. I'm also going to reduce the line height on that. So we can do a line height of 1 or like a 1.2 maybe, just to sort of bring it more together. I'm going to live with it like this just because I don't have an alternative and it's working. It's okay. Maybe we could put a gap in between to make sure that there's always space there if ever you're getting things hitting each other. But I'm going to live with what it's looking like. It does mean there's more space here than there is here because we have the longer titles and stuff. So this could be something you run into. You have to talk to the designer with, you change the name of the roles you're using, whatever it is. The only thing that I can think of is like you could limit how long these lines are, but then in doing that, it won't really help us with this one. So I'm going to leave things as they are here. If you want to play around with that a bit more or come up with a better layout, you can. But now, of course, we get to like the whole fun part of this. Is getting this scrolling here, and we'll come and add that current role at the end. But for adding the scroll, there's one thing I don't think we can do very easily without like a complex JavaScript solution, which I don't think this warrants, but it's having the scroll bar stop here. Having the scroll bar go all the way over is pretty easy. Having the scroll bar stop here is not very easy. So I'm going to do one where it goes all the way to the edge. And yeah, I think if we wanted something like this, we'd actually need to have, I'm not 100% sure. There's ways of doing it, but they're probably more work than it's worth, in my opinion. So if we take a look at what's happening, the reason right now our whole page is overflowing and it's actually causing problems here too, because this element is so big. So the way we can actually fix that, what we want to do is set a maximum size on the main area that we have right here. We could potentially do that on this, but for me, I think the easiest thing is saying this main actually has like, this is how big it should be. So I'm going to set up a semi-responsive version and then we'll make it more responsive. But right now we have this 15 rem space here, and then we have the rest is going to be for that. So for me, just to make sure that it always fits, what we can do here, and I'm not a huge fan of viewport units, but this is a situation where we can do a width, and I'm going to do a calc of 100 viewport width minus 15 rem. And in doing that, it means that it's still looking like it's overflowing, because it is overflowing. But then what we've done, let's put a border here, actually, or outline. We'll do border for now. Border 2 pixels, solid orange. We've now set, you see there it is. Like this is how big it actually is because of the space that we have to live in. And I want to make sure that we don't like, we want this to now be contained within that space so it's not overflowing out the side of the page. So we can take that border off. And now what we want to do is go back down to where we had our job experience, where this is being created. And we can say an overflow X of auto. And I'm using auto because I don't always want the scroll bar to be here. I only want it to show up when we need it. We also have a bit of scrolling this way. So we have, anyway, I'm going to sort of cheat here a little bit. We're going to fix this. Let's just say minus 20 rem. Just to get rid of that scroll bar, and we'll come back and fix that after. Yeah, we'll address that overflow sort of issue that was going on there soon enough. But as you can see now, this scroll bar is working, but it's matching the width of what we have, which is perfectly fine and what I sort of want to go after. So we're going to stick with that. And what's kind of cool here is like, as this grows, it's going to work. And you can see we're hitting here, but like, well, I have another overflow issue here apparently, but we'll get around to that. But when we're at these smaller sizes, we can see that everything's working okay, and it just sort of adapts. And once it's big enough, that the scroll bar goes away, which is sort of what I wanted to happen in the first place, though it looks really bad at large screen sizes. So we will adapt that as well. But now let's get around to styling up that scroll bar, because it's actually really easy to do. There's a few different things that we'll have to do for it though. Just because of how the scroll bars work and how we have to style scroll bars. I'm not going to go into tons of detail on styling them just because I have done a video that goes really deep into how you can custom style scroll bars, but we'll touch on enough to get this working at least. If you do want more information, that will be linked down in the description below. But for now, let's come here. We're going to say job experience, and we actually have a few of these to do. So we're going to have, actually, we'll do this first. WebKit scroll bar. Like that. Now actually you can see, look at that, we're auto completing a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to do this and then we're going to duplicate this 2 times because we need 3 different things here. The first one is the scroll bar itself. The second one is going to be the scroll bar track, and the third one is going to be the thumb. And what I can do here is I can actually just say that the height of this, so we can say height is like 0.75 rem. And now the weird thing is when I hit save, it's actually going to completely disappear, and that's because now it's relying completely on my own styling of it. If we come here now, we can say that the track, which is the line in like the color of the background, so we can say here, we can set a background color on that, and we can use that color, which is the primary 800, and hit save. And it's actually showing up, and it's hard to see because it's glued to here, but you can sort of see it in this zone right here. We'll fix the spacing, but let's just come here and say that we want the thumb to have a background color and use the accent there, which would be our var color accent right there. And there we go, we can see it, and we can see that it works just like we had before. If you're on mobile, touching side scrolling, if that would work, hold shift down, you can side scroll as well. So that's there at least. Now we have a border radius on there, so we could come, and what's interesting is I think the border radius might be different on both. I'm not sure, but I'm going to come here and do a border radius of 100 VW, which just makes it into a pill shape. And then let's just come up here and let's just add some padding bottom of, it looks like 1, maybe 2 rem. Right, and then we give us the space here. We can't use margin for that because this is sort of inside of that element, but now we have our nice little scroll bar that goes along the bottom. And of course we could use this here too. And this here, like if I make this 1.75, it's going to make it really big, make it 0.25, it's going to be really small. So this is what's going to control how tall it is this way. You can't set a width on it. The width would only work if it was a vertical scroll bar, because that would be really cool if you could say width 75% and then actually match the design that we have here. But alas, this is what we have. But already I think that looks pretty good and it's pretty cool. So it's working and I'm happy with that. And now I'm not really going to reference the Figma design anymore. So let's make this bigger and let's just see what happens here at large screen sizes. And then we can go down to the smaller ones. And overall, actually, I think it's working pretty good. And interestingly, that seems to have fixed any issues we had with random other scroll bars popping up. Oh no, it's at large screen size. That's still coming in and a vertical. That's really weird. I'm not entirely sure what's causing that. But I think one of the issues right now is just sort of like the willy-nilly way that I made these two sides. So what we're going to do is let's come back up to that and take a look at it. And the reason this is happening is we have our grid template columns, which we have a 15 rem and then a 1 rem. And then here it's at 100 minus 10. So we're getting roughly that. The problem that's happening is this space here, we have a gap, and this gap is bigger. You know, it's adding to this, that, you know, it's sort of its own track that's in the middle here. And so that's not really taking into account that. So for now, let's just take this down and make it 5 VW and hit save. And now what we could do is also subtract 5 VW from here and make sure this one's 15 rem. And if we do that, that means we're fitting exactly the amount of space we have and we have no more horizontal scrolling. So with that fixed up, I'm going to come down to this next part because this is where we have these that are sort of growing and becoming too big. We also have this here. Now I could set like a maximum size this whole area could have to live, but I think it's going to look really weird. And then if you end up with more items than 3, it's going to break the sort of experience that we currently have going, because the side scrolling would happen even if it's not full screen and it wouldn't look as good. You'd have like a space down the side with the scroller with the items just appearing out of nowhere. So what I'm going to do instead is here where we have the job experience, which is these guys right here, we have this set to grid, we have the auto flow going. I'm going to just say justify content, start. And in doing that, what it means is when we were getting to the big screen sizes before, they were spacing out a lot, right? They were growing, there was more space available, so they were filling, sort of stretching between that space. The gaps between them was getting bigger. Now we get it going like this. And the advantage of that is let's just come here and look at it. We can add another job. So we can just take this one and I'll duplicate it. So now we have 4 jobs. So here's the last one there. But that just means now when we get onto these larger screen sizes, that keeps going. It keeps showing up over on the side here. And we can scroll over and then scroll back or whatever. But then eventually, if you're on a really big screen, you actually get them all. And it's always going to be overflowing off on the side, which is kind of cool. And I think sort of keeps the spirit of what this design is trying to do. So that's looking pretty good. The only issue is this paragraph here, which was the intro here. And we could put this on all paragraphs, though I'm going to focus on the intro. And I'm just going to put a max width of, say, 65 CH. CH is characters. So it's going to be a maximum of 65 characters long, and that's way too much. Let's try 45. And there we go. That looks a little bit better. It just balances that whole sort of thing out a little bit more. So it makes it easy to read, because when that's stretching out, like this one thing is stretching all the way across as one big line, it's kind of weird. Whereas now we can focus on that, and then we see, you know, these we can scroll across and start looking at them. But we were into 2 last things I want to look at. One of them is getting that little job thing here. And the other one is that's kind of awkward. When I scroll here and I get to the end, like the fact that it lines up with the edge there is kind of annoying. So we'll do the easy one first, which is the title, and then we'll do that last little fix at the end. And I just realized I never mentioned the Firefox scroll bars either. And I did mention that we were going to look at that. So for that, we can do it really fast first because it's right here. And all we need for that is a scroll bar color. And here we actually give it 2 colors. And so let's bring in Firefox here just to compare. And we have the default one here from Firefox. So if I have my scroll bar color, for now, let's just do red, blue. And when we do that, we should get, there we go, a red and blue scroller. So we can replace that with our variables, var, and that was my accent, and then the blue, which was the dark blue, var primary 800. And now we get the scroll bar looking like this, and there's not much else we can do on Firefox. This is just what it looks like. There's very limited styling that you can put on something. So at least it's better than nothing, and it sort of fits with the overall vibe that we've created. Not all browsers are going to be the same, and that's just the way life is. So there we go. That one is done. Now let's come back over to here where we can finish this up. And so we want to put that current role here. And the way I'm going to do that is down here with my job. We can come right here and we can say job. And I'm going to choose the first child. So this is only going to select one of these divs if it's the first child. So we come look here. The first child inside of job experience is what will get selected. And just to show you that it's working, let's do a background of red. And just in case it's not going to work, we'll throw an important on there. It's not working because I put 2 colons and we just need 1. There we go. So you can see that one is becoming red. Now I don't want that, but what I actually want to do is choose that and choose the before on there. And we can say content is going to be there. Now for this, I'm also going to use position absolute, because I want to pull it out of the flow. Because if it was in the flow, it would be a little bit problematic because it would go inside of this div right before the 2021, which I don't want. So let's do this. And actually content I was putting as blank, but we want this to be current role. And you can see there it is. Perfect. So it's there. It's just really awkward to see. As far as assistive technologies, most screen readers do read it. And even if it wasn't read out, I don't think it would be a big issue. So color, we can use our var. It's really not a, when I say it's not going to be a big issue if it wasn't read out for some reason, I don't know, for me, it's more of a visual thing. It's just an extra little touch than, we're saying it's the most recent job. You could put like current within the time frame if you really needed to, but we're going to do it like this. We're going to say top of 0, and it's going to fly to the top of the page. So that means my job also needs a position of relative. And the top is there. We need it to be on top. So let's just go take a quick look how high it is. It's not too high, but let's just say top is going to be -1. Can I use LH now? I don't know if that worked. No, so we'll do -1 rem. I think the -1 LH actually worked. The problem is the overflow we have going on. So we're going to do 2 things here, and that's happening because we have the overflow here. It's actually hiding the overflow this way. So I'm actually going to, on the job, add a padding top, and this is going to work in a few different ways. So on the job experience, let's go here, and this is going to help us because we have the bottoms. Let's just do padding block, which is top and bottom, and that adds space on the top and it keeps the one there. And the advantage with that is now, as this comes up, because when we change an overflow in one behavior, we can't have the other, we don't have control over it, but it just sets, it sort of is automatic what it does with that. But there we go, we can set that. And you know what I'm actually thinking? Instead of having the position relative on here, what could actually be better is we change the containing block from being this, we could actually have the job experience be what it is. So here, let's add, after all the grid stuff, after that, let's do a position of relative here. And why I'm doing that is now this, I can actually just set it to 0. And it's going to be right at the top of that element. And then I can say a left of 0, and it's going to go to the left and line up exactly where we want it. And the reason this is happening is position absolute will look for its nearest ancestor that has a position other than static. So when I had it on the job, it was being positioned according to this job. But if I move that over to the job experience, it's not looking at this anymore. It's only looking at that. So it's actually like this square here means nothing to it. It's only looking at the big box that we're inside of now, which in this case makes lining things up exactly with the edge here a lot easier. We don't have to remember what the padding was, anything like that. And I think it's another fun thing there to learn that once we put the scroll here, that the other direction gets hidden. And sometimes you have to come up with interesting ways to sort of play around with that to actually make something visible again. Luckily, there's no weird backgrounds going on or something that this would actually cause a problem with. In this case, we can sort of get away with it. Cool. So now let's fix that issue with going all the way over to the right side here and adding a bit of space. And once again, we're going to use a pseudo element. I love pseudo elements if you haven't already been able to tell. And so to do this on my job, this is my first one. We could do this as, no, I'm going to do this as the job experience actually. So on the job experience itself, what we're going to do, and I'm going to give this a color, so job experience, and I'm going to use an after. So we'll do content, Let's just do width of like 200 pixels, background of red. And you can see right away, there it is. So it's showing up here, and the reason it's here is because it's the after in the job experience. So because it's a pseudo element, it means it's after the last element inside of the job experience. It's staying in there, it's just adding like this final sibling after whatever the last thing in there was, which was this div. And then we get this red box. But we don't want it to be red, we can just do transparent, don't put a background color on it, whatever. And it just gives you this like extra area to go into, and you just make it as big as you need it to be. So now if we scroll all the way over, we get there and then it shows up and it just keeps this from being butted all the way up on the edge. We could do it with the last child having some margin or some padding and other stuff like that too. Padding wouldn't work, but a margin on the last child could potentially work. But I sort of like just inserting that little thing like that. I think it's a fun way to do it. And of course, it's still like I'm going off screen, I realize that, but like when it's big enough, we still don't have the space. It does mean the scroll bar gets introduced a little bit early, like you can see here, rather than getting introduced here. But to me, it's not that big of a deal. And it works pretty well. And just for fun now, we can see that it's working pretty much at all screen sizes. And if I inspect on it, let's go over and turn on the responsive mode as a final test. It is getting a little bit narrow. I think one thing we could definitely do is add some margins to the top here to play around with that, because I don't think that's looking too fantastic. So we could do that now, where we could just say that would be our main grid, right? So not the main grid, actually, the main itself. We just want to prevent anything from touching the top or bottom. Or we could do that. I'm just thinking on the fly here. I was going to do it only on that. Yeah, we do, because if I did it on the main grid itself, that would cause some problems in the sense that like this white, the border that we'd set here, that padding would influence it. So we want to make sure that's only being applied to our main itself. So on that main, we could just padding block of like 2 rem, something like that. So just if this does get too small, that it's never going to touch the top of the page, which is going to help things out. And then there is the question of this space in the middle and making that go away. Now, this is obviously why taking a mobile first approach can sometimes be useful, but these are the types of problems that we can always run into. And I think it's a very normal thing where like, everything's great and then this sort of thing happens. So when this does happen, take the easy wins first, look for things that are really mucked up. And like right now, this is busted because my title is not working. That's because it doesn't have enough room. So I think if we fix our gap, we should be okay there. But go for your easy wins. And for me, that easy win is fixing the title a little bit there. So if we come down, that's my page title. So our line height down here, line height, I'm just going to go with a 1 because it's, there we go, that fixed that. And so when we're trying to fix things up, if you're not sure why a layout's not working, get your dev tools open and take a look. So we're going to put our grid on. And we have the grid where we have our gap here and we have the 2 sides. And what's happening here actually is we go this way, this space is actually looking like it's getting bigger. And that's being caused because if we come all the way down here, the margin left is following a 10 viewport distance, right? And it's getting as small as 3. So the space on this side here, like this is 15 rem and it's locked in at 15 rem because I said it has to be 15 rem. And then as we go this way, this space is getting smaller. So we're just left with a bigger space here. So it's this kind of weird thing that it's actually shifting over and it looks like it's going that way more. Ideally, this space would like sort of continue to shrink more and more and more, right? It would just sort of be, instead of being locked in at 15 rem, we actually want it to be shrinking as well. And so let's go and see if we can find a way to do that by coming back up to our main grid. And if we look here, again, we had the 15 rem, and because it's 15 rem, it gives us this weird sort of shifting around thing. So is there something we could do here to be able to prevent that from happening? And I think we could use a clamp or a min-max here as well to try and do that same type of behavior. So I'm going to do a clamp because we definitely want a potential smallest, and the easiest way to know like what's the smallest I want it to get. And so like at 5 rem, you can see it's getting smaller. Now because this is 1 FR, let's just try that. Like I think if I did even 1, like it's never going to reach that because of the content that's in there. Just because of the way gap, we're getting there, but it's hitting like a minimum based on the margins and the content that's in there. So 1 rem is probably smaller. or, you know, let's just try 10 rem. Now what's happening is that margin that's getting bigger, this has less room to live in. So we're running into like these weird problems because of that margin that's shrinking and growing on the left side. Which is really fun. I love when things like this happen because it makes you sort of like have to think about like how things are working and play around with them a little bit. But I think what we could do is actually get away with a clamp here as well. So let's come in and do the clamp. And I'm going to say that the smallest is 5, the biggest is 15, and that growth factor in the middle is going to be 15 VW. And the reason I'm using 15 here is because I want to use the same value that I was using down here. Oh, I used 10 there. So I want to use the same that I used on my margin left here to set this up. So let's try that. And if this doesn't work, what it means is that margin left solution that I originally came up with is broken, and this completely broke it. So that's clearly not the solution that we want. Yeah, that solution's not working. I tried another value in here. When you're running into issues like this, where you tried one thing, then you tried another thing, and then you're trying to like, I'm trying to layer solutions on top of solutions that really are causing more problems than they're helping, and it's broken everything we've actually worked kind of hard to create. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to come down here where we'd originally set things up with this margin left, and I'm going to get rid of it. We're just going to go with the margin 0, and obviously that sticks it onto that side, which is kind of awkward. We could actually come on this and we could do a display flex. And the reason I want to do that, and a grid I think would work here too, because I want to open up and align items, and not in align items, I want to open up a justify content of center. Or maybe I even want to move it off to the end. I want to open up that possibility of having some alignment. And I think in doing that, we're just coming up with a simpler solution where that space on the side is going to adjust a little bit more naturally, because now we're sort of falling into that clamp area that I set up that doesn't seem to be really, oh, now it's actually starting to grow a little bit at the really big screen size. But at least we're running into a world where we have this fixed size and the elements inside of it aren't moving around and aren't being fluid and causing weird things to happen. And then the space in between these two things is just a defined space that we set up. And that makes life a lot easier and a lot more predictable to be working with, even though my first solution, I thought I was being clever, and I sort of liked it at the time. It worked. But as we develop more, we saw the way that different things were interacting with it, it falls apart a little bit. And it's really important that we're able to sort of go, okay, this is getting more and more complex. There's probably an easier way to solve that. So don't be scared about breaking something or deleting what you've already tried and starting something else. This was a fairly mundane thing with a really weird behavior. And even if you can't figure out what the weird behavior is causing, because that was a little bit of a weird one for sure, just diving in and like, okay, let me get rid of what's causing some of these spacing things and start it over and see if you can find a simpler way to do it. It's usually going to work out better when that happens. So for now, I'm going to turn off my dev tools because we want to fix things up a little bit here. To get these last finishing touches on here. And I think what I'm going to do is actually keep this, but I'm wondering if I can allow that to get into like a pretty small range for the minimum size. But I think I'm going to make the bigger size a lot bigger at bringing this clamp value in. And that means like as we get to bigger sizes, see how it's actually growing on the side there. So that's more of that what I want. And then as we get to these smaller sizes and smaller sizes, the space there is allowed to get really small. And there we go. I think that makes a lot more sense in how it's working. So I'm going to leave that there. And what that means is I'm actually going to copy that because that's the size of our first column. Because if you remember, what we need the width here to be is we have our gap, that's the space in between. And maybe we could even make that bigger now. So we have the gap, that's the space in between here. So that's this number here. Then we have the 15 rem here is actually the size of this first column. So then we could put that value here, and it looks really weird, but it's going to work. And so now it's lining up exactly because we have 100 viewport width minus the gap minus the width of our aside. And this is definitely somewhere where you could come in and you could do something like aside width, and you could put our clamp there, right? Because this is getting into like that territory where it's really hard to understand what's actually going on, or it's kind of, it takes some figuring out. Then we could say like the main width, and that was 1FR, and then we could have our gap size or something like that, and in this case it's 10 VW, and then we can assign those all in there. And so I just went ahead and assigned that to all of them. So here we have the grid template columns I just broke this on another line so we can see it all. So we have my a side width is one column and my main width is the other one, and my gap size. And then here for the main, when we look at the width of it, we see that it's 100 VW minus my gap size minus my side width. So instead of being some seemingly random numbers, at least it sort of makes a little bit more sense. And now if we go and take a look in my dev tools and I turn on the responsive mode, and I know they're off screen, but now we can shrink this down. It looks like we're losing stuff, but we're not. Look at that. It's still working exactly how we want. We're on a touch device technically now, so we can scroll it on over, and it works going down to like pretty, here we get some weird issues going on, but it's working up to like the point where we probably need it to. The only issue really is my resume here, so we could fix that pretty easily by just coming up, and this font size could be in a clamp as well, so that can actually shrink down. And then pretty sure if we do that, everything even to really small screen sizes would work. The icons, maybe we could set those up as something that could shrink down. So if we said 2, then maybe 10 viewport width, minus 0.5 rem or something. So now we get that, it's working there. My resume shrinks down and it's not getting in the way anymore at this really small screen size. Other than a foldable that would fit, we'd probably want a little bit of padding for our paragraph text on the right. The icons could shrink down. There's a few small improvements we could make here, but overall, I think it's looking really good. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, it took us a little bit of time to get here, but I thought it was important to break down the thought process. Don't forget, if you want the cheat sheet, it is linked down below. If you'd like to see other builds where I walk my way through the entire process, I have a playlist that is right here for your viewing pleasure. And with that, I would like to thank my enablers of awesome, James, Enrico, Michael, Simon, Tim, and Johnny, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.